This is the shocking truth behind the Syrian refugee crisis that has been hidden from the public. Those boatloads of Africans you see on their way to Europe, yeah, well, for one, they're not coming from Syria, the clue being that they're African, and two, they're not refugees. They've not been rescued off the coast of Italy. Governments and aid agencies want you to believe that these people have struggled in flimsy fishing boats and dinghies to make it all the way across the Mediterranean. That's total BS. This is the insane reality of what's actually happening. The migrants pay people smugglers €1,500 each. They're not destitute refugees. The people smugglers then transport the migrants to a position just 12 miles off the coast of Libya. Just 12 miles. They then send out a distress call and the migrants are picked up by EU and NGO vessels. It's literally a taxi service straight to Europe. As The Spectator's Nicholas Farrell exposes, there's reason to suspect that the people smugglers are actually in direct contact with aid agencies, which is why they're so often first on the scene to rescue migrant boats. And this is a criminal offence. The law states that the refugees should be taken to the nearest safe port, which would be Tunisia. But these NGOs are taking them straight to Italy. As you can see in this marinetraffic.com illustration, the NGO boats are leaving Italy, travelling to right off the coast of Libya, just off the coast, then returning to Italy with their human cargo. It's literally a taxi service. And isn't it ironic that the only time these boats are diverted from Sicily is when G7 elitists are in town? It's a security threat for them to be faced with the very crisis they created. An investigation in Italy found that most of the NGO ships are German. Even the EU border agency Frontex accused aid agencies of helping, quote, criminals achieve their objectives. The people smugglers contact the aid agencies directly, knowing they won't be arrested. Quote, since June 2016, many boats have been rescued near the Libyan coast by aid agency vessels without any prior distress call, suggesting the rendezvous has been pre-arranged. Italian prosecutor Carmelo Zuccaro says he has evidence of phone calls between criminal people smugglers and NGOs like Save the Children, Proactiva Open Arms, and SOS Mediterranean. George Soros Open Society-backed foundations like Avaz.org, Medicine Sans Frontiers, and MoveOn.org are also allegedly involved. Soros invested $500 million to, quote, help refugees, some of which is going straight to these NGOs. ISIS is also offering migrants free passage through the Mediterranean if they join the terror group. So in some cases, they're actually footing the bill for these migrants to pay the people smugglers, who in turn are in communication with the NGOs. This is a complete scandal and a huge security threat, yet virtually nobody knows that this is the primary method by which refugees are pouring into Europe. Just 2.65% of migrants arriving in Italy are awarded asylum status. They're not refugees. Half of them disappear on arrival and don't even claim asylum. Over 200,000 migrants are arriving in Italy alone via this method every single year. And that's only going to increase. If you think there'll come a point where the number of migrants pouring into Europe slows to a trickle, then think again. If we continue these disastrous policies, it's only going to get worse. Much worse. Africa's population is exploding. Look at the countries surrounding Libya. Niger's population is set to almost quadruple in the next 3 decades, from 20 million to 72 million. Chad's population is set to leap from 14 million to 35 million. Sudan is heading towards 80 million. Egypt, 152 million. Ethiopia, 189 million. Nigeria, 400 million. And I haven't even included those arriving from the Middle East. The character of a place is determined by the people who live there. You can't flood European cities with tens of millions of people from the Middle East and Africa and expect it to remain the same. Eventually, it's going to start to feel less like Europe and more like the Middle East and Africa. Look at what's happening in southern Italy, where these migrants are arriving. Once a holiday paradise, Sicily is now the scene of a turf war between the Italian mafia and African crime gangs. Listen to what the mayor of Palermo said. Quote, Palermo is no longer an Italian town. It's no longer European. You can walk in the city and feel like you're in Istanbul or Beirut. Palermo is a Middle Eastern town in Europe. In other countries, the evidence is pretty clear that this grand experiment in cultural enrichment isn't working. Migrants are responsible for 90% of shootings in Sweden. A report by Germany's Interior Ministry found that an extra 402,741 crimes were committed by migrants, with non-Germans accounting for 27.6% of total offences. 500,000 migrants in Germany are on welfare benefits. Gang rapes of girls and women are becoming commonplace. Women in Paris are now protesting against constant abuse and harassment by gangs of migrant men.
To demonstrate the kind of reaction they get from men, they visit a local cafe with a hidden camera. Before they even get inside, their presence seems to disturb the other clients. There are only men in here, and they're not very welcoming.
Le mieux, c'est d'attendre dehors.
Pourquoi?
Ici, avec des hommes.
Bah, c'est pas grave, on vit dans un monde où il y a des hommes et des femmes. Ça vous dérange, vous?
Moi, c'est pour vous.
Non, pour moi, là, je suis...
The bar owner doesn't want to talk. The other customers, meanwhile, are uncomfortable.
Mais je m'en fous, on va se faire discrète, petite, dans un coin.
Il y a que des mecs dans ce café.
Et comment c'est normal qu'il n'y a que des mecs? Imagine que tu veux prendre un café avec une cousine, une amie, ta femme. Non, normal.
Elle reste chez elle.
Ta cousine, elle reste chez elle. Ah bon?
Elle fait ce qu'elle veut, mais pas avec moi. Ben voilà, dans ce café, il n'y a pas de mixité.
Est-ce que c'est normal?
On est à Sevran, on n'est pas à Paris.
Même à Sevran, c'est la France.
T'es dans le 93.
Et alors, le 80... Et alors?
À Paris, c'est des mentalités différentes. C'est comme anglais.
For a woman, going into a bar here is breaking a taboo.
Murders by migrants are daily news. Even leftists who help migrants reach Italy admit that many of them support ISIS.
He said they were processing men, adults in their 30s, who all had phones with ISIS stuff on the phones. They were being separated. When they were being handed over to the authorities with the information explaining that these guys, had all this on their phones and what their ages were, and they were just being processed through. There was nothing, they weren't being separated out, they just all went through with everything else.
Germany and Italy are forcibly confiscating private property to house migrants. PostNord announced it would stop mail delivery to the migrant suburb of Rinkeby because it's too unsafe. And people who complain about any of this are being put on hate crime blacklists. Social media giants are censoring accurate reporting as hate speech. What's the solution to this crisis? Well, it isn't to pander to racism, xenophobia, or to resort to futile stunts and identitarian vigilantism. In fact, that only emboldens leftists and the institutions they control to pursue their policies with more vigour, prolonging their delusion that they have the moral high ground. You're also not going to convince reasonable-minded people by becoming right-wing social justice warriors. It just turns people off. Listen, the individual migrants aren't to blame for trying to escape to a better life. If I lived in a poverty-stricken African country, I'd try to do the same, and so would you. But again, that's economic migration. It's not refugees fleeing war-torn countries. It's fundamentally dishonest to call it a refugee crisis when it's not. 85% of migrants arriving in Italy are men. The vast majority of them are from countries that are not at war. But migrants didn't create this crisis. The political elite created it. Leftist NGOs created it. They created it because they fundamentally hate Western values and are quite prepared to destroy them to remain in power. Europe's loss of faith in its own achievements and culture. The continent's demographic collapse. This guilt-ridden self-immolation. This suicidal virtue signalling that led to Merkel to swing the borders wide open. It's all based on an existential crisis engineered by the leftist political elite, ensconced in ivory towers and luxury hotels, shuttled between banquets and private parties by their chauffeurs. They don't have to live amongst the societal crises that they create. They don't care about the impact millions of unassimilated migrants have on society or culture. They only care about power. They replaced what defined the West, rule of law, equality, with the empty platitudes of tolerance and diversity.